hasn't really become real. Going back to something you said, you said that Biden could end this, but he very clearly said in his United Nations address that Vladimir Putin alone has the power to end this war tomorrow. But that's not true. So why would he say things like that? Is he hoping the American people aren't listening or that we're stupid?
Well, he's trying to maintain the fiction that Russia is something that it is not. He keeps sort of depicting President Putin and his government as some sort of authoritarian, anti-Western, anti-democratic regime. That's not really true. This Russia has nothing in common with the Soviet Union. It has a little bit in common with Tsarist Russia. They have a stronger central authority because historically the largest country in the world, Russia, has needed that strong central authority to survive.
The UK government has announced it will help significantly reduce the cost to install solar panels for UK homeowners.
But otherwise, it is by no means the sort of satanic entity that the Biden administration and its supporters claim. Far from it. In fact, if you were going to make that argument, you have to turn to Ukraine, where you could find plenty of evidence for that sort of satanic character. The Russians have acted very defensively throughout this entire thing. You recall when they went in, they only went in initially with 90,000 troops. Then they began increasing those numbers as it became clear that no one would negotiate with them. When it was finally obvious that any further negotiation was impossible after Boris Johnson showed up in Kiev and told everybody on behalf of Biden, we're going to support you as long as it takes, no matter what, then the Russians said, well, this is not going to work. And so the small army that everyone was claiming was incapable suddenly went on to the defensive. And that started in the fall. They're up to almost 1 million men under arms now. The army has transformed. They're better equipped than they've ever been. This is a much more lethal force than anything Russia fielded in the 1980s. And lately, you've had some very stark warnings come out of Moscow. One of the more popular and famous figures in the Duma, who is very close to President Putin, said just within the last few days, this is the situation. Ukraine can accept our demands, meet our demands, or it can cease to exist. And he's very close to President Putin.
Yeah.
I think that's the mood. I think people have had it with it because their great nightmare is you sit down with the West, you negotiate another settlement, you ask for neutrality, they promise you neutrality, and instead they give the place cancer, which is essentially what we did in the coup in 2014. We gave the place terminal cancer. So that means that the Russians will probably press on in the weeks ahead all the way to the river. I'd be very surprised if they didn't. They're in a position where they could move up and seize Kharkov almost immediately. And the Ukrainians have evacuated large numbers of people from Kharkov with that expectation in mind. They've also evacuated a number of people from Kherson and parts of Odessa. It may be that the Russians will cross the river while the river is very low, move over into western Ukraine and down into Odessa. I don't know. They have the capability to do this. Remember, Putin has been reluctant to do it for 3 reasons. Number one, he didn't want to provoke intervention from the West because he doesn't want to go to war with us. I mean, imagine that. What a novel idea. I wish people in Washington shared that view. Secondly, he didn't want to take heavy casualties. He decided, let's wear out these Ukrainians first, and that's where they are now, completely worn out. But I don't think he or his generals ever thought that the Ukrainian forces would hurl themselves relentlessly into these defenses, which they had absolutely no chance whatsoever of cracking. I think they're amazed. And right now, if your viewers have paid any attention, you got to look for it, but you can find it. There are mass desertions. Mass surrenders are occurring up and down the line. Ukrainian soldiers are tired. They're exhausted. They've been shot to pieces. The people that are out there now are probably the least trained soldiers that Ukraine has ever fielded. These are effectively civilians who a few weeks ago were conductors on trolleys, driving buses, teaching school, cleaning streets. welcome to the Ukrainian army, and off you go to the meat grinder. These people don't want to die, and I think they've had it. The other thing is that the Russians have been very smart. They haven't mistreated the Ukrainians. They know if they surrender, they come up on a frequency if they can, and they all speak Russian. And they say, look, we want to come over. We can't evacuate our wounded. No one will help us. And the Russians say, sure, come over. And they move them through a process. They're fed, they're cared for. And then at the earliest opportunity, I'm sure they'll be repatriated. The other thing is that Ukrainian soldiers know that their battalion commanders, these are lieutenant colonels, probably many of the company commanders, certainly everyone above lieutenant colonel, is essentially cheating them out of their salaries. Whereas we're paying the Ukrainian army's salary. Let's face it. We've got Ukraine is the 51st state, and they know that these commanders are carrying people on the rolls who have been dead for months, killed in action. Well, why are they doing that? Because money to pay them keeps showing up, and so these officers are pocketing the cash. Now, what happens to the widows, the orphans? Well, they're getting nothing. I mean, this is a vicious circle of corruption that in wartime is probably even worse than it was before this thing started. So Ukraine is a completely dysfunctional state. If you're looking for an example of a failed state, this is it.